This would be Sifita Tangi, Auditor General of Tonga, sharing on Tonga's story, ending in victory with full independence, and then followed by Carla Jago, Acting Deputy Auditor General of Australia, on some of the challenges to independence. So can I have Sifita? Yeah, thank you.
Kia ora and mahalo lelei to you all, Chairman of PASAI, the guest speaker of the Congress, Right Honourable Helen Clark, ministers and parliamentarians of Cook Islands, John, the Secretary General, and the members of PASAI, Benjamin, and all the delegates. Being an honor to be invited to share with you again the stories of Tonga independence, the journey of Tonga PASAI to become an independent PASAI, and I'm told to talk about the victories. I have talked about our story of independence few times. It was on our newsletter. I presented, talk about it in our last Congress in Palau last year. And today, I'm gonna try to be brief on the victories that we obtained and experienced so far. After more than 40 years from the date of the Lima Declaration in 1977, the independence of the position of Auditor General and the Tonga PASAI laid down in the Tonga Constitution, July 2021. The positive result, which I hereby count as victories, are: first, we have moved from one of the executive government departments, we were called the Audit Department, to an independent Supreme Audit Institution. Secondly, we have moved from being under the Prime Minister of Tonga as the ministerial head of the office and the Auditor General to just the Auditor General, with no minister or executive officer above him. We have moved from the appointment and removal of the Auditor General by the Prime Minister and Cabinet to obtaining the consent of the Legislative Assembly on the recommendation of the Speaker on the appointment, and required by law a two-thirds majority of the Legislative Assembly on the removal. The story of my appointment, the recruitment process, starts from the advertisement and the selection of the interview panelists was done all by the Office of the Speaker of the House. There was no involvement of the Public Service Commission. We have moved from reporting to the Prime Minister to reporting to the Legislative Assembly through the Speaker. We have moved from the Public Service Commission responsible for the audit staff under the Public Service Act to the Auditor Generals have the power to recruit his or her staff under terms and conditions by the Auditor General. We are still following through the budgeting process of government through the Ministry of Finance. However, there is a new provision in our Public Audit Act that we submit our annual action plan for the coming year to the Legislative Assembly together with our draft budget. If we want extra fund for our operations, we can go straight to Parliament. Laying down of the Auditor General's independence in the Tonga Constitution very much assist with enhancing the general understanding of the concept and the principles of auditors' independence. In particular, the answering of the question why the Auditor General needs to be independent. I know we all, as have been mentioned and discussed by the panelists, that being independent of the executive government and protected against outside influence is the cornerstone for achieving an objective and effective audit. The adequate legal protection against any interference with planning, conducting, and reporting of audits ensures that the audit mandate is guaranteed. Hello.
Thank you, Safita, for sharing Tonga's journey to independence. Can I now ask to come on to the podium Carla Jago, Acting Deputy Auditor General of Australia.
Good morning, everyone. As Des introduced, I'm Carla Jago. I'm currently acting as the Deputy Auditor General for the Australian National Audit Office. Rona Mellor, the Acting Auditor General, wanted to pass on her apologies for not being here. She really enjoys coming to PASAI usually, but currently in her Acting Auditor General role, we needed to stay in Australia and table some audits. So I'm here in her place. I'd like to acknowledge all of our esteemed attendees here today, particularly our panel, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. It has been a fascinating discussion so far on PSI independence and the challenges to that in our region. As we all know, the independence of our officers is a critical element enabling our role as auditor. The significance of PSI independence has been enshrined in the Mexico Declaration, and the 8 principles of the Declaration are a strong foundation for all PSIs. As mentioned earlier, InterPSI's Global Stocktake Report was recently released. The PSI Independence Index for 2023 provides an average score of 73 points across those 8 principles of the Mexico Declaration. And that's for all PSIs. If we compare the PSIs that responded to the global survey in both 2020 and 2023, results show a 1-point decline in those overall results. In the PASAI region, though, there are some positive indicators from the survey about improvements in PSI independence, particularly in relation to reported instances of executive interference. For the ANAO in Australia, the statutory independence of the Auditor General is provided for in the Auditor General Act 1997, and the Auditor General is not subject to direction in terms of whether a particular audit should be conducted or should not be conducted, the way that audit will occur, and the priority given to any particular audit matter. However, the current legislative frameworks within which we operate also contain several challenges to the Auditor-General's independence. The Public Accounts Committee conducted an inquiry into our Act in 2022 and made 27 recommendations for change. 12 of these go directly to the independence and strengthening the independence of the Auditor-General. We are still waiting for a government response to that committee's review of the Act. Much of our submission to the Public Accounts Committee inquiry for this review covered the nature of our independence, and that's what I want to touch on with you today. So what are the challenges to the ANAO's independence? There's three main areas that I'll touch on: publication of material, governance, and budget. Turning first to publication of material. So at present, there are provisions in legislation which can enable the executive to prevent the publication of certain materials in Auditor-General reports in Australia. These provisions have the potential to affect the Parliament's scrutiny of the executive by limiting the Auditor-General's independent reporting to the Parliament. Under a particular section of our Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act, the Finance Minister may use written determinations to require modifications of material that relate to designated activities, usually national security or intelligence for particular law enforcement agencies. Also, the Auditor-General Act itself provides that the Attorney-General can issue a certificate to the Auditor-General, preventing the Auditor-General from including particular information in a public report if the Attorney-General believes that such disclosure would be contrary to the public interest. In June of 2018, the Attorney-General issued such a certificate, which required the omission of information and material from a performance audit that we were preparing on the Army's Protected Mobility Vehicle Light. This was the first performance audit tabled by the Auditor-General of Australia with a disclaimer of conclusion, so we could not draw a conclusion because of the material that we were required to omit. The issuance of that certificate presented one of the most significant challenges to independence of the Office of the Auditor-General in recent times, with the potential to affect the Parliament's scrutiny of the executive by limiting our independent reporting to the Parliament. If I turn now to governance. For administrative purposes, the Australian National Audit Office is an entity within our Prime Minister and Cabinet portfolio, and we are subject to the Public Service Act. This creates a challenge for the ANAO to accomplish its mandate and provide independent oversight of the Australian Public Service, while fulfilling responsibilities as an entity operating under the requirements of that framework. Further, as members of the Australian Public Service, the Deputy Auditor-General and all ANAO staff are potentially subject to external direction under the framework. Under the Public Accounts Committee review of the Auditor-General Act I mentioned before, there's a recommendation that the Australian Government consider amendments to the arrangements so that the ANAO is established as a parliamentary department. Other jurisdictions in Australia, such as Queensland, have recently made this shift. While the independence benefits of being a parliamentary department largely relate to the appearance of independence, this is an important consideration, as independence comprises both independence of mind and independence in appearance. With this model, ANAO staff would clearly not be members of the executive government. And lastly, I want to cover off on budget. A conundrum for many audit officers is the nature of its budget in terms of capacity to set and use budgets autonomously. The ANAO provides the Public Accounts Committee with a draft estimate of our budget requirements for each year. The Public Accounts Committee considers those draft estimates and makes a recommendation to both Houses of Parliament and the Prime Minister, outlining whether the committee believes we have sufficient resources to carry out our functions. Our budget process, though, is caught up in the usual budget process for the executive government. The current system is effective when there are no changes to the ANAO's budget, but there are risks when there's late changes to the budget, and this happened in 2018. In 2018, the Auditor-General was advised by the Treasurer that he was not able to inform the Public Committee or the Public Accounts Committee directly of changes that had been made late in the budget process to reduce the ANAO's budget. This identified a risk that the executive government can reduce PSAI effectiveness and independence by controlling the budget. Other budget models, such as an entity fee-paying model, modify the nature of the relationship between the ANAO and the auditee, and brings with it other potential threats to independence. So to preserve both the reality and perception of audit independence, the ANAO supports the current approach of having the ANAO funded by appropriations from the Parliament and maintaining the focus for the ANAO on auditing for the Parliament. In conclusion, I wanted to reiterate that independence is critical to enable SAIs to effectively perform our audit functions. The ANAO has a strong legislative framework in place which supports its independence, but we still face challenges, as I've mentioned some today. In sharing these issues, as SAIs, we can work together to overcome threats to independence and ensure quality outcomes for the Parliament and our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, for your contributions on the 3 points in which you covered on the publication, governance, and also to the budget. Now, drawing on the examples presented by both Safita from Tonga and Carla from ANAO, this question now is for the panel. What, in your view, are the critical actions for PASAI under its new strategy to support PSI independence in the Pacific? So the question is, what are the critical actions for PASAI under its new strategy to support PSI independence in the Pacific? Anybody want to go first? Okay, Benjamin?
Yes, thank you once again. What I can see is 2 very interesting cases about challenges and opportunities regarding independence. We just witnessed the news about the new legal framework, and of course, once you have a legal framework which is aligned in a better way to the principles of the Mexico Declaration, you have to realize that it's also very important the way it's going to be implemented by the SAI itself, but also how it is going to be understood by other actors, and also how this legal framework, which is basically the Audit Act and the constitutional provisions, how these are connected with other regulations that can also affect the functioning of the supreme institutions. Because at the end of the day, the main components of the legal framework of supreme institutions can also be connected with other regulations across the public sector, and you have to be aware of that in order to see if there are any threats or challenges that in the future can materialize regarding your independence. And I like also very much the challenges regarding the budget of supreme institutions. And what we have realized is that it's a very complicated issue, because at the end of the day, most SAIs must follow the regulations that are established for the rest of the public sector institutions. And it's very difficult, and we have faced a lot of problems trying to advocate for SAIs to have a different kind of treatment. Politicians says, no, we cannot give them a different kind of treatment. They have to be treated as any other state institution. But what we have realized is that even when you have these regulations, formal regulations in place, there is always a room to have agreements, to have commitments between the parliament, the SAIs, and the executive in order to make transparent the process of determining the budget of the supreme institution, and also to make transparent the decisions that are taken regarding reductions or increases in the case of a positive result regarding the budget of the supreme institutions. What I mean here is that I will say that it's always, when determining a strategy regarding independence, to see that when we talk about the legal framework that affects independence, it also covers other regulations, and we also have to take into account that within the regulations that are established, for instance, the one of determining the budget of supreme institutions, there is always a space to have like informal kind of things that can help. One of the best examples of informal practices in let's say in the PASAI community is the protocols that the GAO has established to deal with the requests from Congress, audit requests from Congress. The GAO must, let's say, accept all the requests from Congress, but they have established a protocol to say, okay, but we have to within what is allowed in the law, we have to establish certain criteria to accept or not the request from the Congress. What I mean is, it's always very important to see the room that is within this legal framework and try to establish an agreement, memorandum of understanding, or a commitment with the relevant actors.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your contributions. Can I now ask Helen to reflect?
Yes, look, I think PASAI is already pretty active in this area, and I can only encourage, firstly, the national audit institutions not to hesitate in reaching out to PASAI and to INTERSAI and its various associated bodies if they're feeling under pressure and need support. And at that point, there's then a number of things that can be done. Obviously, PASAI and INTERSAI will want to find out some more. It may eventually lead to one of the following actions, I guess. It could be a public statement of concern. It could be a visiting mission that seeks to interact with the wide range of stakeholders, including those who are causing grief to the independence of the audit office. I think such issues can also be worked on together with important partners. For example, World Bank is supporting initiatives that help audit officers. The World Bank gets very concerned at lapses into authoritarianism. That actually puts all grants in question. The IMF is also very important in supporting integrity institutions. I know from my experience with Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative that the IMF recommends that countries with the minerals, oil and gas sector actually join EITI to ensure that there are proper disciplines and standards around the regulation of those sectors. At the country level also, there will be bilateral donors who take a particular interest, and UNDP, certainly in my time, was the only development agency in the UN which had the good governance mandate and could support institutions like audit officers, prosecutors, ombudsmen, human rights institutions, judiciary, etc. So there's a range of actors who can be brought into play. Let me sort of put that in the context then of geopolitics and the trend to more populist and authoritarian governments. Some authoritarian governments are populist, some aren't, they're just authoritarian. And also that, the Pacific, with the South Pacific nations with their 12 or whatever votes at the UN, become quite a center of geopolitical contestation. And again, my recommendation always is to the Pacific, stand together, don't be played off against each other and as a region. You have integrity as a region, stand together. And it's always of concern to the Pacific family if it sees someone being picked off by one side or another. I think another group of friends who could be mobilized in the South Pacific are the South Pacific elders. And this is a very important development that some of your former senior leaders have come together to be a soft power voice in the Pacific. For example, the former Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum, Meg Taylor, one of the former premiers, prime ministers of Tuvalu, who was just down in New Zealand at a webinar event I was at, Mr. Sopoanga, Anote Tong from Kiribati, a range of them. Again, these Pacific elders have formed to be a voice for peace and development in the Pacific, so they should be seen as allies. So I think my sort of point drawing all this together would be no Auditor General and Audit Office in the South Pacific should ever feel that they're standing alone, that there will be a support ecosystem that will kick in to say this just isn't on, and will make interventions at the highest levels, and using whatever levers they have, whether it's the World Bank loans or the IMF credit rating or whatever it is, to try to ensure that we do keep the Pacific as a zone of peace and development, and not as sinking into something else.
Thank you, Helen, for your comments. And now, can I ask Esther?
I definitely agree with all the points that you have raised, Helen, and all the options, and that there is support available from PASAI. But specifically on the strategy that you have asked me about, so the new strategy that we will be discussing tomorrow, one strategic priority that we have would be audit independence. And this covers the work that we plan to do to support the sites in achieving independence over time. And it will be in terms of advocacy, which Helen has talked about, and also technical support. But one important thing that I would like to add to the conversation this far is that just like the example of Tonga, it takes leadership to take this journey forward. And it takes strong leaders to take the agenda of audit independence forward. And wherever we go across the Pacific, we always tell the story of Tonga and how they've done it. And it wasn't easy. It took them 40 years to achieve it. But that's an example, not just Tonga, but in other countries that have achieved. So we share that experience across the region with countries that have yet to achieve some steps, and also to encourage them. If these countries have done it, they can also do it. And part of the new strategy is that we are going to put more effort in twinning arrangements where PASAI New Zealand and PASAI Australia will support the Pacific Island sides in taking this journey forward. Thank you.
I think it's well covered. I wrote down 5 different things. I think the first would be promotion. I think we've talked about that with comments from Helen and others. Visiting missions, fact-finding trips for PACs, all of that's quite helpful just to warm the water. And seeing this as a real benefit for the people of the country, if the parliamentarians can see that. I think that promotion aspect, PASAI is strong on. I think there's some kind of just complications, though, that PASAI can really help with. The first is the one we've talked about already this morning about confusion. Does independence mean you're not accountable? Have you let something out of the cage that you'll never be able to control? Well, the answer is clearly no, but that often isn't understood. So I think that independence and accountability is something PASAI can also help people really get to grips with, because it's quite a big step, making an independent officer of your parliament. Then just beneath that, it's quite tricky for some countries, and even Australia was just talking about it there. How does the budget process work? What are the mechanics of an independent officer of parliament, and can the Minister of Finance put their fingers on it, or does that just flow around them? And so quite a lot of that understanding of the mechanics of how it works and how it's still safe. You're still controlling the money, you're just controlling it at a different level. And how that works through a budget process, etc., is something else that PASAI can help with. Facilitating legal support, potentially advice on legislative change, that kind of thing, so that you've got something to put in front of people and they can react to it and say, yes, that will work, I don't like that, rather than this big concept of independence. And then last, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, but never underestimate the power of collegial support. I'm part of the Australian ACAG, I just can't remember all the names. Auditor General must be the AG, but Council of Auditors General. And every couple of years they do a comparison of all our acts about their level of independence across Australia and New Zealand. And it's quite nice to put your act on a league table, particularly nice for New Zealand because we're at the top. Although I think ACT jumped on top of us just recently, but you know, we'll get back. But it's actually quite used to show that to your speaker and say, actually, there's things here that we need to just keep tidying up in our act as well to make sure we keep that level of independence. So the collegial support, that's quite a very tangible one, but actually just talking to others, Safita, Amasi, all those that have been on the journey and have experience about what they did to overcome some of the challenges. So Pacific Auditors working together as the PASAI brand, and I think that's another reason to leverage that. Cheers.
Thank you all from the panel for your contributions. So now we'll shift to the final phase of our panel. We're now open for questions from the floor. For all our questions you can ask to any one of our panelists. There will be roving or microphone station on the sides. Can I ask each person, when you're asking a question, to introduce yourselves, stating your name and which organization and country where you're from. So the floor is open for questions to ask the panel.
Thank you. I'm Benjamin Cruz, the public auditor from Guam. And I thank Esther for mentioning Guam. I am the only elected public auditor. And I really want PASAI and INTOSAI to reconsider their PSI PMFs, to not be so rigid about the way that you score Guam and its independence because of the fact that I'm elected. As an indication of the independence of this office, Doris would still have this office had she not retired. She had served 20 years, and she'd be celebrating her 24th this year, and she could run for re-election, and no one would run against her. She's challenged 4 different governors and survived it. The governor right now would rather walk into a pool or into the oncoming traffic rather than shake my hand because of the audits that I've issued. But she can't control anything. But when you guys do your PSI PMF, I'm 0 or 1. And my budget is set to the appropriation budget of the government. I get a percentage regardless. If it goes up, it goes up. My budget goes up. If it goes down, it goes down. And I think the auditor, the SIs need to understand that though we are independent, we also have to lead by example. I was the appropriations chair, Doris's last year, as the public auditor. And because of our tax base being based on the United States and the president having cut the budget, cut the taxes, we lost a lot of money in tax revenue. And as chairman of appropriations, I had to cut government 10% across the board. Though I was going to be the new public auditor because Doris was leaving, I could not leave the office at its current level, nor could I have increased it in the way that Doris wanted to make it, just because I was going to take the position. How could I lead by example? How could, if I said, I'm going to be taking the office, I'm going to up the budget 25% and cut the rest of the government 10%. So we also have to understand that I've managed to get the legislature to set me a percentage of the budget, which is very generous and gives me lots of leftover money that I get to keep. The budget that's given to me isn't. I get 1/12 every month, and no one can hold on to it. But yet, you guys, because of the Mexico Declaration, rate me at 0.
Okay. Just to explain to the panel what is BJ is talking about, it's actually the process of the appointment of the PSAI head. And in terms of Guam, they do it but the PSAI-PMF is the tool that we use to measure the performance or the maturity of a PSAI. And according to that, which PASAI did not invent, it's an international tool that's used across the world to assess the maturity of PSAIs. And when that assessment is done, it looks at the process, even if you're appointed as such, like
No,
you
I'm
said,
elected
elected, yeah.
by the people that of the.
Oh, so yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, we'll consider that when we do the next one for your side. But it's actually a framework that he's talking about and assessing the position, because his position unique from other sides, that he's elected, like in the election, compared to the appointment of a side that's normally through a process, which is what he's referring or he's alluded to.
And those of you that are appointed need to kiss the ring of the Prime Minister. I don't have to do that. I'm the only one I have to keep on my side are the people, the electorate. When Doris ran, she ran unelected for the last several elections. I ran unelected, and this last time got 85% of the vote. But I'm still 0 or 1.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Helen, would you like to provide some comments on that?
Yes, I think, and I'll put my national hat on. I think in New Zealand it would be unthinkable that we would elect any statutory officer like an Auditor General. I know that things are a little different in the United States, and Guam, of course, has a close association. I just did a double check and find that around half the states of the USA actually elect judges. In New Zealand, this would be unthinkable. Unthinkable. And I would not in any way encourage Interside to relax the criteria that it uses, because for every good case we could find of where an election appears to have produced a workable system, we can find others where elections to such statutory and important officers are seen as really politicising them. I mean, again, with my national hat on, it's fair to say one has no idea of what the political affiliations of our integrity officials are, our judges, our Auditor General, our Ombudsman, whoever. We don't want to know. That's irrelevant. We want to know that people have been put in place through a proper process and they're acting with one interest in mind, and that is to protect the public interest, not that of any political affiliation. Now, it may be that people who are running as candidates may also be labelling themselves as independents, but in principle, I must say I don't like the practice of electing such statutory officers. I think it can be a very slippery slope. That's my view.
And as a former judge, I understand that. I was on the bench for 17 years, and I would never run for it's not elected on Guam. But for the public auditor, when Doris had it, her audits were her what stood out and what people understood. And I'm not saying relax but just reconsider and look and see how you're scoring to see whether or not we truly are independent. Because I kiss no rings. I answer to what everybody says is the most important. And you, John, you mentioned the quotation from your leader. The important the people, the people, the people. And those are the only ones that I answer to. And Doris answered to for 20 years. Not someone whose ring I had to kiss.
That old saying, single case makes bad law. We can find cases where it might have worked, but again, it's a process that could have a slippery slope with it. That's my point.
I'll just ask Benjamin to provide a response as well, and we can wrap up this question.
Just reinforcing a bit what Helen had mentioned, I'm giving some background information about SAI-PMF. Basically, the idea of SAI-PMF is benchmarking the performance of SAIs with international standards accepted by INTOSAI, and that's the way it was thought, the SAI-PMF. Of course, there can be certain circumstances where the SAI-PMF doesn't fit, but it has been accepted widely in INTOSAI that the SAI-PMF is a tool that could be used by most of the members of the organization, and which is, once again, aligned to the INTOSAI framework of promotional pronouncements. And the idea is to have this objectivity regarding the standards and the performance of SAIs. And from my point of view, this is a personal opinion, of course, it will be difficult, this kind of tools which are used broadly, to take them away from, let's say, from the line of the international standards accepted by all the members of INTOSAI.
So thank you, BJ, for your question, and thank you for the responses from the panelists. I also like to open it up if there's any more questions. Okay, we have a mic in the front, please.
Kia ora, my name is Tina Brown. I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee of the Cook Islands. The discussions we've had this morning seems to me that the drive is to get the audit office independent. Can I just ask, what is the statistics in our region? How many of the countries are truly independent and how many are not? I know that Cook's is striving to become truly independent, and I just wondered what the stats are.
Can I get Esther?
Out of the 20 sites that about less than 20, about 20% have full independence or have a score of 3 to 4 in terms of independence. So when we have talked about the SAI-PMF, or that's the tool to measure the performance in terms of audit independence, and we have talked about the 8 pillars, but 4 main areas would be the legislative framework, the financial independence, the ability to hire and fire staff, and then the process of the appointment of the SAI head, the appointment and the removal. If you put all of those factors together, less than 3, about 3 out of 20 have achieved a score of 3 to 4. 4 means managed or high level, and we have a score of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is the highest, so about less than 20% have a score of 3 or 4. So,
and is Cook's 0?
sorry?
Is Cook's 0? 1?
Nobody is at 0. Everybody's on a journey, either 1 or 2.
Thank you, Honourable Tina, for your question. Do we have any other questions from that people would like to ask of the panelists? Yes, okay, we can have one. Oh, we have two. Okay.
Hello, I'm Sandra Lavasachny from Western Australia, Deputy Auditor General. My question is just really that independence is obviously in legislation as well as in appearance and the actions of people who you interact with. I'm interested to hear in what the panel thinks an Auditor General's response could be when the actions of those people that you interact with actually undermine the independence which is in the legislation.
Well, thank you for the question. This is one of the main elements that we have identified when it comes to threats to SAI independence. We can have very good legal frameworks, which are completely aligned to the Mexico Declaration principles, but the way these legal frameworks are understood and implemented by other entities which have interaction with SAIs, this is a key element that defines whether SAI is really, let's say, in line with the Mexico Declaration principles. That's why in the global project that I talked about some minutes ago, we are trying to identify these elements that are non-written, that are conventions, but that affect the way the legal frameworks are implemented. We have seen that these informal factors sometimes reinforce the Mexico Declaration principles, but in other cases, they diverge from them and they affect the position of the independent side within the country. So it's very important what you mentioned. SAI independence goes beyond the legal frameworks. It's a key element, it's a necessary element to have the legal framework aligned to the Mexico Declaration principles, but there are other considerations in practice that can affect the independence of SAIs. And these are the issues that we raise, for instance, in our SAI independence rapid advocacy mechanism that we have established in an IDI. When a SAI thinks that they are facing a threat to their independence according to the Mexico Declaration or the implementation of the Mexico Declaration, they present a report. We receive the report. We conduct an assessment, getting evidence from different stakeholders, including the SAI. We prepare a report, and then we publish the report. And what we have realized is that this intervention matters in terms of the environment that the Supreme institution is facing domestically. This leads us to think that global actors are important in terms of advocating for the independence of SAIs because they can affect the balances and equilibriums that are present in a distorted, let's say, context that the SAIs are facing.
Thank you. And just to follow on from the question raised, maybe I can ask this to either Esther or John. Is there, SAIs within the region where, this is actually happened in practice, where they have the necessary legislative framework in place, Thank you.
We have a lot of examples of things like that happening. For example, in one country, they have submitted a report to Parliament, but the Speaker refuses to table it. Therefore, they cannot publish publicly because of standing orders of Parliament. So what do? They try to write. So we follow up with them. So those are instances. So their reports are not discussed by Parliament. There are instances where legislation for some of the SAIs, they can take their budget to Parliament, and the Parliament or the Public Accounts Committee can review the budget and allocate the budget. Some, the Ministry of Finance would stop, or they would say, we stop the implementation of the act in certain ways. So what do? We follow up with them and we support them They write submission to cabinet in trying to address these things themselves, and some of them, they can't do anything. In other countries, one country that we actually participated in public consultation of new legislation. So we supported the SAI head and the staff, and we had the technical lawyers to support as well. And that's been a year of that, but no progress forward. And mainly because somebody's sitting on the legislation or not progressing, or cabinet does not approve for this next step to be taken. So there are other instances in another side that I can think of last year. There was a performance audit and we supported them. And some of the budgets were supposed to provide for the auditors to go to the outer islands to do this particular audit. Ministry of Finance actually did not release the money. So the project was put on hold for about 3 months, and it delayed the whole process. And we know that this report, when it comes out, it will be 3 years after the event, and it's a performance audit. So it loses the relevance of the report over time. So some of the countries, because of the political situation, they would always tell us they can't do much, or they want us to advocate for them at the regional level. And some sites here, I'm not mentioning country names because their site is, they're here, most of them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, obviously quite concerning to hear of the particular examples, and it also makes one wonder whether the legal frameworks are tight enough. I mean, does there need to be in a legal framework a sort of general provision that says that any attempt to block the filing of reports to this, to that, will be a violation of this act? You know, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't draft it, but, you know, if a speaker can, you know, refuse to present something to Parliament, it seems to me there should be something in an act that says nothing shall stand in the way of a report being presented in a timely manner. And of course, in the end, if the law is being broken, that should be exciting the interest of prosecutors, right? Someone should be bringing a case. Even someone could bring a civil case, presumably. But yeah, maybe legal frameworks need to be looked at to ensure that those kinds of blockages are not possible.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, and John would like to provide?
Probably at a different level, really. Again, I feel privileged to be in the position I'm in where that there is a settled constitutional discussion around the office and its role. However, in that environment, I still get what I might call, movements towards my independence. For example, not responding in a timely fashion. You talked about a 3-year delay on a performance audit. I get long pauses between correspondence sometimes. Occasionally, you get legislation where it affects the public service, but the clause might be written that the Auditor General should have regard to this, which we're very vigilant on because that's kind of the gateway into much more insidious ways of directing me. And often where the office has been particularly vigorous in an area and it's obviously upsetting people, I do get a little bit of media narrative and also a select committee narrative where surely you've looked at this sufficiently now, do we need to have more work in that kind of subtle warming of the environment to push you in another direction. So gentle, but I think it's constantly something to be vigilant for, even in well-regarded, well-protected independence places.
Yes, thank you. Just to echo a bit what Helen mentioned regarding the inclusion of a provision indicating the breach of the independence of size. What we have realized, because we have participated in a lot of processes to prepare new legal frameworks, we have realized that it's complicated to include these kind of things because politicians start to, okay, if you want me to accept the conduction of, let's say, performance audits, it's okay, but let's take a look at that provision. That's when it comes, that's when it becomes relevant, the participation of global actors in this kind of discussions. When you have the presence of IMF, of World Bank at the table, the government and the politicians start to open in a bit more, right? That's why I was trying to say that global actors matter in this kind of discussions regarding the independence of supreme institutions.
Thank you. I think we had a question on. Yeah.
Hello, good morning. My name is Elaine. I work with the president of the Brazilian Federal Court of Accounts, the current chair of PASAI, so I would like to thank for all the panelists. And I have a question especially to Dr. Ellen Clark. Based on your experience as Prime Minister and above all, a world leader, and considering that you said that global coalition for advocating for SAI's independence can be something very supportive. What kind of advice would you do to the heads of SAIs on which kind of skills and how to build resilience to face this kind of challenge, especially if they are, if they want, they have the strength to expose internationally a threat to the independence of SAI, because we know it's not a simple task. It can become like a foreign affairs issue. So how can these leaders have resilience to bring this problem, this internal problem, to the international community? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, and I'm under no illusion that it can be even life-threatening for brave statutory officials to stand up and call truth to power, as John Ryan used the phrase earlier. I remember, and again, not naming countries, but I can think of one where a statutory official fled the country for his life, and that would not be an unusual example. So, I mean, how do you build resilience to these sort of threats? Firstly, I think in situations where there's real physical threat, you need physical security, and it may not be best provided by the state which is making the threats. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would come back to the discussion we were having about the ecosystem around the Supreme Audit institutions and the leader of it, that they need other actors in that integrity ecosystem standing with them. So whatever those other statutory officers are, obviously the voices out of the Parliament, the access to media, if free media exist. And then, as we've just been discussing, these issues will come to the attention of the IMF and the World Bank, which are quite important actors, and whose money and opinions matter. So, you know, we'll go out to a global audience. But, yeah, the institution will need to build a lot of sort of resilience and support and strength around it, because in the end you can never stand alone. You'll be knocked out. You need others coming in and standing with you at the national level, if there's a regional organisation as there is here, at the international level. And just keeping all those relationships in good order, always communicating as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. The reports that you're issuing being seen to be of high quality and of a non-partisan nature, acting for the citizens. I think that's also part of building that, you know, good standing, which reinforces the resilience. But to come back to where I started, I'm under no illusion that many public audit officers are not operating in the benign circumstances of, say, New Zealand, where, as John says, you may get some pushback, but it'll be a bit gentle, and you just have to stare straight ahead and carry on and do your job. But that's a benign setting. Not all settings are benign.
So thank everyone for the questions from the floor, and thanks to panelists for responding. So we're just going to close up with one final question for all our panelists. Quick fire, rapid fire responses in less than 30 seconds. We'll start off with our twinning partner, John Ryan. What is your favorite thing about the Cook Islands?
Well, there's so many, starting with Des and all his relatives who are supporting us. Every time I get in a car, it's another relative driving us. So it's lovely, family-connected feeling when you're here. So there's beauty, there's warmth, there's lovely beaches, but it's actually the people.
Thank you. Esther?
I like it that small that you can go around the island in an hour. It's nice and clean, and it's not as hot as Samoa.
It's the people. I mean, it's beautiful, right? Rara's beautiful. It's warm. It's a place you can chill out, but in the end, it's the people. It's the friendliness.
People, of course, and I feel very, very comfortable here because it reminds me a lot of Latin people too.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're all fortunate that we called this place our home, and that concludes our panel discussion. Thank you, everyone. So I'll now ask Esther to give a few remarks about the official photo about to take place, and most importantly, lunch. And on behalf of everyone, I'd like to extend our warmest metaki mata to Auntie Helen. We're grateful for your attendance, and Helen will also join us for lunch briefly, so please take the opportunity again to meet and speak with her over lunch. Sorry, Esther.
Okay, once again, in addition to what Des, thank you very much, Helen Clark, for being with us. We have a small gift to show our appreciation. Thank you. We also have a small gift for our guest from overseas, Benjamin. Thank you.